The mahogany table gleamed under the harsh light of the boardroom chandelier, but nothing about this moment felt elegant. My palms were sweating against the cold leather of the chair as the lawyer unfolded the thick envelope containing my father's last will and testament. Every breath felt shallow in my chest, the kind of suffocating breath you take when you know a blow is coming but you cannot step aside. My brother Gregory sat across from me, 35 years old, Harvard MBA Navy suit tailored so precisely it looked painted on. His Rolex ticked audibly in the silence as if mocking my heartbeat. Beside him, my mother Margaret avoided my eyes, her hands folded tightly in her lap like she was bracing herself for an earthquake. My father Richard Miller, the man who had built a $41 million real estate empire brick by brick, was gone, and this moment was supposed to define what remained of him. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice deep and practiced. To my son, Gregory Miller. I leave the controlling stake in Miller Properties, the corporate headquarters in Manhattan, and the penthouse on Fifth Avenue. Gasps of admiration rippled through the relatives seated behind us. Gregory smirked, leaning back in his chair, pretending to look modest while his eyes sparkled with triumph. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. It wasn't that I wanted the skyscrapers or the millions, but hearing the magnitude spoken aloud made me feel microscopic, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Then the lawyer's voice shifted. To my daughter, Vanessa Miller. I leave the vessel docked at Pier 7, registration number 4281, known as the Marigold. He paused as if expecting more words to follow, as if there had to be more, but there wasn't. A wave of laughter burst out of Gregory's throat before the lawyer even folded the page. A boat. Gregory's voice carried through the polished room. An old rotting boat that hasn't left the dock in years. That's your grand prize, Vanessa. His words were daggers sharp and deliberate, designed to humiliate me in front of everyone. A few cousins stifled giggles while others shook their heads in pity. I felt heat rising up my neck, my face burning, but my voice wouldn't come. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably but pressed on with the remainder of the will, distributing minor sums to charities and distant relatives. None of it mattered. The only thing ringing in my ears was Gregory's laughter. $41 million, he said, drawing out the number like he was savoring it. And all you get is a sinking pile of wood. Maybe you can live on it like one of those washed-up dock rats. My fists clenched beneath the table. I wanted to scream that I had worked hard all my life as a civil engineer, that I had built bridges and schools, that I had lived without anyone's handouts. But at that moment, every eye was on him, not me, and they were laughing with him, not at him. The humiliation was unbearable. My mother's lips parted like she might say something, but she shut them again, lowering her eyes. That silence was worse than Gregory's taunts. It was betrayal by omission, a confirmation that in this family I had always been second tier. Memories flashed in my mind, birthdays, forgotten achievements, ignored Gregory's failures excused while mine were magnified. And now the last chapter of my father's life sealed with a final insult. I rose from my chair, the legs scraping loudly against the floor, cutting through the laughter. My throat ached, but I forced words out. If that's what he chose, then that's what I'll take. My voice shook, but I didn't let it break. Gregory leaned forward, his grin smug and poisonous. Perfect. Maybe I'll buy it off you, little sister. 10 grand. That's generous for firewood. He winked at the room, and another wave of chuckles followed. I stormed out before tears could betray me, my heels echoing against the marble hallway. Each step felt heavier, like I was carrying not just the weight of an old boat, but decades of being diminished, overlooked, erased. The echo of Gregory's laughter followed me out the door, but under that humiliation, something else began to burn in my chest. It wasn't just pain, it was a promise to myself. If my father had left me only a broken vessel, then I would uncover why. Because Richard Miller never did anything without reason. And I refused to believe that his final message to me was mockery. That night, staring at the ceiling of my modest apartment, the words replayed again and again in my head. To my daughter, Vanessa Miller, I leave the vessel docked at Pier 7. That vessel was more than a boat. It had to be. And I swore I would find out what secret my father had hidden in its decaying hull, even if it destroyed every last illusion my family still clung to. The night after the will reading, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My father's voice kept echoing in my head, flat and legalistic, as though even in death he couldn't say the words that might have made me feel like his daughter. My brother's laughter cut in after every phrase, louder than the lawyer, louder than my own thoughts, and yet none of it surprised me. The truth was, my family had always made it clear where I stood. When Gregory turned 16, my father bought him a cherry red BMW fresh from the dealership, the smell of new leather still clinging to the seats. I remember standing in the driveway holding a cake I had baked myself for Gregory's birthday, watching as Dad beamed with pride, his hand resting firmly on Gregory's shoulder. "This is what success looks like," he told him, his voice thick with approval. I had just turned 14, and my gift had been a hand-me-down bicycle with rusted handlebars. My mother's words still sting. "A girl doesn't need a car. Save your energy for school." At 18, I earned a scholarship to a top engineering program. My designs had won state-level awards blueprints so detailed that judges told me I had the precision of someone twice my age. I looked for my father in the audience during the ceremony, scanning row after row of parents clapping proudly for their children. But the seat where he was supposed to sit was empty. I found out later he had taken Gregory to a golf retreat with business partners, calling it an opportunity he couldn't miss. Gregory's failures were always wrapped in excuses. When he dropped out of his first year at college, my father wrote the tuition off as a bad fit for his talents. When Gregory crashed the BMW after a night of drinking, my mother whispered to me not to mention it at family dinners, insisting, "He's under a lot of pressure. You know how fragile he is." Yet when I came home late from my night shifts tutoring to save for textbooks, I was scolded for being irresponsible with my time. The contrast was unbearable, but after years of swallowing my hurt, I became an expert at silence. What made it worse was not just the favoritism, but the way my small victories disappeared into shadows. At 22, I presented a bridge design that a city planning board actually adopted. The mayor shook my hand, photographs were taken, the project even made the local news. But at home, no one mentioned it. My mother set down dinner that night and reminded me to act more ladylike instead of congratulating me. Meanwhile, Gregory bragged about shadowing a hedge fund manager for a single afternoon, and my father toasted him with champagne. It wasn't that I wanted the empire, the suits, or the penthouses. I just wanted to matter, to be seen, to be more than a daughter defined by what she lacked compared to her brother. My entire adult life had been shaped by this imbalance, and the will reading was just another brick in the same crooked wall. But this time, the humiliation felt final. My father's last words, the legal record of his priorities, were forever etched: empire for Gregory, scraps for Vanessa. Yet even as the memory stung, a different image surfaced. I remembered once years ago sneaking down to the marina with my father on a Saturday afternoon. Gregory had dismissed the idea, saying boats were too boring. My father sat on the deck of the Marigold silent for hours, scribbling in a leather notebook while I dangled my feet off the side, watching fish dart beneath the surface. He hadn't spoken much, but there had been a calm about him, a weight in his silence that felt deliberate. At the time, I thought it was nothing. Now, in the harsh light of his will, I wondered if it had meant everything. The favoritism had shaped me, scarred me, but it had also taught me endurance. I had survived being overlooked, survived being dismissed, survived standing alone in the shadow of my brother's spotlight. And if all I had now was a broken boat, then maybe it was time to stop seeing myself as the forgotten child and start seeing myself as the only one willing to look deeper. 2 days after the will reading, my family gathered at a hotel ballroom for what was supposed to be a somber post-funeral reception. Chandeliers glittered overhead, reflecting light off crystal glasses filled with champagne, but the air was thick with whispers and side glances. Black dresses and suits blended with the scent of roses arranged in tall vases across every table. My father had been gone less than a week, yet the atmosphere felt less like mourning and more like a coronation for Gregory. He held court in the center of the room, one hand balancing a glass of expensive scotch, the other gesturing dramatically as relatives circled him like moths around a flame. 41 million, he announced with a grin, so wide it nearly split his face. Dad knew I was the only one capable of keeping the empire alive. It takes vision guts leadership, not whatever it is my sister does. His eyes flicked to me across the room. The crowd followed his gaze, and I felt the collective smirk ripple through them. Someone clapped him on the back, murmuring, "Richard raised a true heir." Another relative, Aunt Darlene, leaned closer to me and whispered loud enough for others to hear, "At least you got something dear. A boat can be charming, you know, for little weekend outings." Her voice dripped with condescension, as if she were patting a child who had lost a toy. I gripped the stem of my glass so tightly I thought it might snap. My mother sat at a corner table, eyes fixed on her drink. She hadn't defended me at the will reading, and she wasn't about to start now. That silence, her silence, screamed louder than Gregory's taunts. Gregory raised his glass higher, commanding the room. You should have seen her face when the lawyer read it. Priceless, like she was waiting for a miracle, and instead she got a floating coffin. Laughter erupted. Some cousins covered their mouths out of politeness, others laughed openly, savoring the cruelty. My face burned, and for a moment I thought about hurling the glass in my hand across the room, but the weight of every eye, every smirk pinned me in place. He wasn't finished. "Tell you what," Gregory continued, his voice loud, confident, dripping with venom. "I'll buy it off her. 15,000 cash. That's more than it's worth. I wouldn't want my baby sister living like some marina hobo." The words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and toxic. A hush fell, as if the crowd was waiting for me to snap, to cry, to collapse. I steadied myself, forcing my voice to cut through the silence. "It's not for sale." My throat was dry, but I said it clearly. Gregory laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. "Not for sale." "Oh, come on. What are you going to do with it? Fix it up with your little tool belt. Use it as a workbench for your blueprints." "Vanessa, some people are born to build empires. Others are meant to scrape barnacles off the bottom." Every word landed like a slap, but I stood frozen, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. My chest felt like it might crack open, my pulse hammering in my ears. I could hear the whispering around me, poor girl. Richard never trusted her. Gregory's right, she's not cut out for this world. The humiliation was complete, public, orchestrated for maximum sting. I excused myself, setting the glass down before my trembling hands betrayed me. As I pushed through the crowd, I caught one last look at my mother. She met my eyes for a brief second, her lips parting as if she might speak, but then she looked away, choosing silence again. That tiny betrayal was sharper than any of Gregory's insults. I left the ballroom with tears threatening but not falling, my heels echoing on the marble floor. Outside, the cold air slapped my cheeks, grounding me. I thought about my father's words in the will about the boat that everyone treated like a punchline. Gregory believed it was worthless. The family believed it was laughable, and maybe it was. But my father had never done anything without purpose. And if he had left me nothing but a rotting vessel, then it was because he wanted me to find something they couldn't see. As I walked into the night, the laughter still ringing in my ears, I made a vow. If the marigold was all I had left, then I would uncover why my father gave it to me. And when I did, every single person who mocked me tonight would choke on their laughter. The marina was quiet when I arrived, a gray mist curling above the water like smoke. The salty air clung to my hair, and the cries of seagulls punctuated the silence, sharp and mocking. I pulled my jacket tighter around me as I walked along the wooden planks, each step creaking underfoot. Pier 7 stretched out ahead, and at the far end, I finally saw her, the marigold. From a distance, the boat looked less like an inheritance and more like a forgotten relic, something abandoned at the edge of the world. The paint peeled in uneven strips, revealing raw wood beneath that had long since surrendered to rot. Barnacles clung to the hull, and the ropes securing her to the dock were frayed, one strong tied away from snapping. The cabin windows were clouded, streaked with years of neglect, and I swore I could smell mildew from 10 feet away. I paused, staring at it, a lump rising in my throat. Was this my father's final joke, a test, or was it really as worthless as Gregory said? A voice startled me. "Haven't seen you here before." I turned to see an older man in a navy cap standing with a clipboard in hand. His name tag read Samuel, manager of the pier. His weathered face softened when he noticed my hesitation. "You must be Richard's daughter." I nodded. "I guess this thing is mine now." My attempt at humor fell flat, my voice cracking slightly. Samuel didn't laugh. He looked at the boat with something close to respect. Your father came here every Saturday, sat on that deck for hours sometimes with a notebook, sometimes just staring out at the horizon. Didn't sail her not once in the last decade, but he never missed a week. His words pricked something in me. I remembered the rare Saturday I had joined him years ago, the quiet between us, the way he had scribbled while I dangled my feet over the edge. Back then, I thought it meant nothing, but now the memory pressed heavy on my chest. Before I could respond, another voice cut across the air, sharp mocking, unmistakable. "Well, well, little sister." Gregory's voice carried like a knife slicing through fog. He strolled down the pier in his designer coat, his cologne hitting me before he did. He looked completely out of place among the fishermen and dockhands, yet his arrogance made him feel like he owned the place. "So this is it," he said, circling the marigold like a predator sizing up prey. Dad's final insult. At least he gave me assets that matter. Skyscrapers land money. And you get this. He rapped his knuckles against the side of the hull, and flakes of paint crumbled off, falling into the water. He smirked. 15,000. Cash. Today. That's more than anyone else would give you for this floating coffin. I felt Samuel stiffen beside me, but I forced myself to stand tall. "It's not for sale." Gregory laughed loud and cruel. "You're clinging to pride, Vanessa, but pride doesn't pay bills. What's the plan? You're going to move in, patch up the leaks yourself with duct tape. This isn't a project for engineers with dirty hands. This is garbage." Samuel cleared his throat, his voice calm but firm. "Your father treated that vessel with respect. You might want to think twice before mocking it." Gregory turned his glare on him. "Stay out of it, old man. This is family business." Then his eyes snapped back to me. "You're making a mistake. Dad gave me the empire because he trusted me. He gave you rot because that's all you can handle. Don't humiliate yourself further." He walked away, his laughter trailing behind him, leaving the echo of his cruelty heavy in the air. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms, but I said nothing. I watched him vanish into the mist, the sound of his expensive shoes fading on the dock. When he was gone, Samuel placed a hand on the worn railing of the marigold. Richard wasn't a man who wasted his time. If he came here every week, there's a reason. Maybe you'll find it. His gaze met mine steady and unwavering. "Don't let your brother convince you otherwise." I turned back to the boat, its weathered frame outlined against the gray water. To Gregory, it was worthless. To the rest of the family, it was a joke. But to my father, Samuel's words echoed, "There's a reason." My humiliation was still raw, but under it, curiosity sparked like a flame. Whatever secret the marigold held, I was determined to uncover it, even if it meant tearing the vessel apart plank by plank. The next evening, my phone buzzed with a call from a number I hadn't seen in months. Aunt Helen. My father's younger sister, the one who had always seemed half inside the family and half outside of it, orbiting at a safe distance. She had been quiet during the will reading her face, unreadable, her dark hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity got the better of me. Vanessa, her voice came through calm but firm, the same tone she used when she used to help me with homework as a kid. "I heard you went down to the marina today." "Yes," I said, my throat tightening at the memory of Gregory's laughter still ringing across the pier. "I saw the boat, or what's left of it." There was a pause, the kind that meant she was choosing her words carefully. "Your father was deliberate, Vanessa. He never did anything without reason. That boat isn't trash no matter what your brother says." I let out a bitter laugh. "It looks like trash. Everyone thinks it's trash." Gregory offered me 15,000 on the spot just so he could have another reason to gloat. "I'm sure he did," Helen replied, her voice sharpening. "Gregory has always wanted everything, not because he needs it, but because he can't stand the idea of you having anything at all. But your father, he was different with you." I frowned, pacing my apartment. Different. He barely acknowledged me most of the time. "You think that because you were always comparing what he gave you to what Gregory received. But Richard saw you, Vanessa, more than you realize." Her words made something inside me falter. I wanted to argue, to demand why he hadn't shown it in ways I could measure, ways I could hold up in the boardroom when everyone was laughing at me. But I stayed quiet, waiting. When Richard first started in real estate, Helen continued he was nothing more than a construction worker. He mixed cement, laid bricks, carried lumber until his back ached. He respected hard work. He despised laziness. That's why he gave Gregory the empire. Everyone can see it's flashy. It satisfies Gregory's ego. But Richard also knew Gregory would run it like a spoiled child with a toy. The real test, the real foundation was left with you. Her words prickled against my skin. So you're saying the boat is some kind of test? Maybe. Or maybe it's more than that. All I know is that he spent hours there every week. He confided in me once years ago that the Marigold was the only place where he felt he could think clearly. He kept records there, wrote in notebooks. He was careful. Too careful for it to mean nothing. I sat heavily on the couch, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. If that's true, why didn't he just say so in the will? Why humiliate me in front of everyone? Because Richard was stubborn, Helen said. He believed lessons mattered more than comfort. He wanted Gregory's arrogance exposed. He wanted your strength tested. And Vanessa, her voice softened, almost breaking. He trusted you in a way he never trusted your brother. That boat holds something. I can feel it. Don't dismiss it. I closed my eyes, the image of the Marigold rising in my mind, the peeling paint, the frayed ropes, the smell of mildew. It had looked like the very symbol of failure. But if Helen was right, then beneath that rot lay something far greater than what anyone else could see. Don't let Gregory bully you into selling, Helen said firmly. If you do, you'll be giving away more than a boat. You'll be giving away the last message your father left for you. I swallowed hard, my throat thick. Then I'll find it. Whatever he left, I'll find it. Helen exhaled a sound of both relief and warning. Good, just be careful. Secrets that big, they don't stay quiet once they're uncovered. When we hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment, the city lights flickering through the window. For the first time since the will reading, the humiliation began to fade, replaced by a sharp edge of determination. If my father had hidden something inside that wreck, then I would tear it apart to uncover it. And this time, when Gregory laughed, I would be ready to wipe the smirk off his face. The following Saturday, the marina was cloaked in an early morning fog that curled across the water like restless ghosts. My footsteps echoed along the damp planks as I made my way toward the Marigold, the vessel looming at the end of Pier 7 like a forgotten sentinel. The closer I drew, the more I noticed the details I had overlooked before the brass railing dulled by salt, the faint outline of initials etched into the stern RM. My father's hand carved deep decades ago. I climbed aboard the wood, groaning under my weight. The cabin door resisted at first, its hinges stiff with neglect, but I shoved it open with my shoulder. The smell hit me instantly, mildew salt, and something faintly metallic. Dust motes swirled in the pale light slanting through the grimy windows. The space was cramped, lined with shelves of forgotten supplies, old rope cans of paint, yellowing charts rolled into brittle tubes. It looked abandoned, but not untouched. I set to work rolling up my sleeves. If my father had spent so much time here, he must have left a trace. Hours passed as I combed through drawers, flipped through waterlogged manuals, and tapped along the floorboards with a wrench. Nothing. Frustration gnawed at me every creak of the boat, reminding me of Gregory's sneer. Finally, as I slumped into the corner bench, my hand brushed against a panel beneath the seat. It felt different, looser than the others. My pulse quickened. I crouched, prying at the edges, and with a reluctant groan, the wood shifted. A hidden compartment revealed itself. Inside sat a steel strongbox, small but solid, its corners scarred with age. My heart pounded in my throat as I dragged it out and wiped away the dust. A combination lock guarded its face, the numbers dulled, but still legible. I stared at it, dread and anticipation warring inside me. What code could it be? My father had never shared anything with me openly, never given me reason to believe he'd leave me the key. I tried obvious dates: his birthday, Gregory's birthday. The lock refused to budge. I sat back, shaking my head. Maybe Gregory was right. Maybe this was nothing more than firewood and rust. Then a thought cut through the doubt. My birthday. It was absurd. Why would he remember that detail when he had missed so many of my milestones? Yet my hands moved before my mind could argue. I spun the dial. 0719, July 19th. The lock clicked. I froze, hardly breathing. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside lay a leather-bound notebook, edges frayed, smelling faintly of seawater and tobacco. Beneath it, a thick envelope bulged with documents. My pulse hammered as I pulled them free. The first page of the notebook stopped me cold. It was my father's handwriting, bold and familiar, scrawled across the paper. For Vanessa. 2 words, but they cracked something open inside me, a raw ache I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I flipped through the entries. They weren't ramblings or idle musings. They were meticulous records, transactions, property details, coded notes about a company I had never heard of, Miller Foundations, LLC. Each page listed assets, accounts, and percentages, all with my name attached. The documents in the envelope confirmed it, 42% of a holding company worth millions signed over legally years ago. I staggered back, clutching the papers, my head spinning. This wasn't scraps. This wasn't pity. This was power. Hidden power concealed beneath rotting wood and mildew. My father had left me something no one else knew existed. But why? At the bottom of the box, I found a letter sealed in an envelope yellowed with age. My name was written across it in his firm, deliberate script. My breath caught. Hands shaking, I slipped it into my jacket pocket, unable to open it just yet. The weight of it burned against my chest. The sound of footsteps on the dock jolted me back. I stuffed the documents back into the box and pushed the panel closed, my heart racing. Gregory's voice echoed faintly through the fog, calling to someone on his phone. I crouched low, clutching the letter like a lifeline. For the first time since the will reading, I felt the tide shift. The marigold wasn't a joke. It was a fortress, a secret vault of my father's true legacy. And whatever was written in that letter, it would explain everything. I didn't open the letter that night. I couldn't. My hands had trembled too much, and part of me was afraid that once I read my father's words, there would be no going back. But the next morning, with the city still asleep and dawn barely brushing the skyline, I sat at my kitchen table, the envelope in front of me. My coffee had gone cold, untouched. My chest felt heavy, but I slid my finger beneath the flap and pulled the pages free. The handwriting was undeniably his sharp, deliberate strokes, as though even in his private words he needed precision. The first line made my breath catch. To my daughter Vanessa, if you are reading this, then the world has already convinced you that you were overlooked. I need you to know you never were. The tears came before I could stop them, hot and unrelenting. I forced myself to keep reading. Gregory craved attention his whole life. He never worked for it, but he demanded it. You, on the other hand, worked harder than anyone, and you did it quietly. You remind me of the man I used to be before the suits, before the skyscrapers. That is why I left you the marigold. It was never about the boat. It was about what was inside. My hands shook as I turned the page. Miller Properties is worth millions, yes, but the empire everyone sees is fragile. Debt politics, greed. They will eat it alive if Gregory runs it unchecked. That is why years ago I built something separate. Miller Foundations, LLC. It holds land assets and contracts worth nearly half the fortune. It is quiet wealth invisible to the boardroom, designed to endure. And it is yours. Every share, every acre, every decision rests with you. I gasped, pressing my hand to my mouth. This wasn't just sentiment. This was strategy. My father hadn't left me scraps. He had left me the real backbone, the part of the empire no one else even knew existed. The next lines twisted the knife deeper. You will face anger, envy, and betrayal. Gregory will not accept this easily. He believes he is owed everything, and the world has enabled him. But you must not waver. You were not chosen because you were my daughter. You were chosen because you are strong, because you build with your hands and your heart. Gregory consumes. You create. That is the difference. I dropped the letter onto the table, tears blurring the ink. For years, I had begged silently for acknowledgement, for proof that I wasn't invisible. And now, here it was, carved into paper that smelled faintly of tobacco and salt. My father had seen me, truly seen me. But there was more. The last paragraph made my blood run cold. There is one more truth you must know. Gregory is not equipped to lead because he is not only spoiled, but because the empire was never meant solely for him. Years ago, before I married your mother, there was another woman. She gave birth to Gregory, and though I raised him as my own, his bloodline is not mine. He does not carry my name in his veins only on paper. You, Vanessa, are my only true child. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table, my mind reeling. My father had just rewritten everything I thought I knew. Gregory, my tormentor, my rival, the so-called heir, was not even Richard Miller's blood. And I, the one mocked as lesser, was the only true heir. A strange mixture of triumph and sorrow flooded me. Triumph because the balance of power had shifted in a way Gregory could never contest. Sorrow because the truth would fracture what little remained of our family. The letter ended simply, "Do not fear justice. Evidence never blinks. When the time comes, use the records in the marigold. Stand firm. The future is yours, Richard." I sat in silence for what felt like hours. The letter spread before me, the weight of it crushing and liberating all at once. Every insult, every dismissal, every laugh that had cut me open, it all suddenly seemed smaller. My father had not abandoned me. He had armed me. But Helen's warning echoed in my mind. Secrets that big don't stay quiet. And I knew Gregory would never stop until he destroyed me. The war my father predicted was coming. And this time I was ready. The boardroom at Miller Properties had always felt intimidating, but that morning it was suffocating. The walls were lined with framed photographs of skyscrapers my father had built, glass and steel monuments that had defined his empire. Now they loomed like silent judges bearing witness to what was about to unfold. The long, polished table gleamed under fluorescent lights, and around it sat the board members, men and women in expensive suits, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Gregory sat at the head where my father once presided, his posture relaxed as a shark, confident in his own waters. "Vanessa," he said smoothly as I entered, his voice coated with false politeness. "To what do we owe this interruption?" His eyes flickered with smug amusement, but beneath the charm, I saw a hint of unease. He already suspected I wasn't here just to be humiliated again. I took my seat at the opposite end, laying the thick envelope on the table. My fingers brushed the edges of the documents inside the deeds, the shares, the letter that had changed everything. My heart pounded so loud I worried the entire room could hear it. One of the board members, a silver-haired man named Davenport, cleared his throat. "This is highly irregular. We're in the middle of discussing Gregory's succession." "That's exactly why I'm here," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "My father's succession plan was more complicated than you realize." Gregory laughed, leaning back in his chair. "Oh, this should be good. Are you here to sell us on your little boat, Vanessa? Perhaps you'd like to offer us fishing trips in lieu of quarterly dividends." His mockery drew a few chuckles, but they were nervous, tentative. I slid the first set of documents across the table, the sound of paper against wood sharp in the silence. "Miller Foundations, LLC." I said clearly, "A holding company my father created. It owns 42% of the assets you believe belong solely to Miller Properties, and he transferred ownership to me." The chuckles died instantly. Davenport leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Another board member muttered, "Impossible." Gregory snatched the papers, skimming them with a growing sneer. "Forgery," he spat. "This is a pathetic stunt, Vanessa. You think waving around some fake contracts is going to make anyone believe you." Before I could respond, the door opened. Aunt Helen stepped in her heels, clicking against the tile, a leather folder tucked beneath her arm. Every eye turned to her. She set the folder on the table, opening it with deliberate calm. "These are notarized documents signed by Richard Miller himself, and video testimony of him at the marina confirming his intent. I was his legal counsel for the last 15 years. I can attest to their authenticity." Gasps rippled through the room. Gregory's face drained of color. He slammed the papers back onto the table, rising to his feet. "This is absurd. My father left me the empire. Everyone knows it. He would never undermine me like this." Helen's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Richard left you what you could handle appearances. He left Vanessa what mattered, foundations. Evidence never blinks, Gregory. And this is evidence." The words hit him like a physical blow. His fists clenched, his jaw tight, but he had no retort. The board members leaned in, studying the documents with wide eyes. The empire he thought he owned was slipping from his grasp, and there was nothing his arrogance could do to stop it. I met his glare across the table. "You always believed you were the only heir, but the truth is you were never his blood, Gregory. You wore the name, but you never carried it. And now the empire you mocked me for not inheriting, it isn't yours to claim." A shocked murmur surged around the table. Gregory's composure cracked, his face twisted with fury. "Lies! You'll regret this, Vanessa! I swear you'll regret it!" But the tide had turned. For the first time in my life, the laughter wasn't on his side. The board members whispered, weighing evidence against arrogance, reality against bluster. And in that moment, under the watchful eyes of the empire my father built, I knew the war my father had warned me about had begun. Gregory didn't waste time. Within 48 hours of the boardroom confrontation, I was served with legal papers. He was suing me for fraud, claiming I had fabricated the documents from the Marigold, insisting my father's so-called secret holdings were an invention designed to steal the empire from its rightful heir. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, the pages thick with malice. For a moment, doubt gnawed at me. How could I, a civil engineer with no interest in corporate battles, stand against my brother's army of attorneys? That's when Aunt Helen stepped in. She had anticipated this, of course. "Richard knew Gregory would try to bury you," she said, sliding a thick binder across her desk. "He left more than the documents on the boat. He left me instructions." Inside the binder were notarized statements, transaction histories, and most damning of all, a video recording. On the grainy footage, my father sat aboard the Marigold, his voice steady. "This is my daughter's inheritance. Gregory is not prepared, nor is he blood of my blood. Vanessa will hold Miller Foundations. That is my will and my choice." The day of the trial, the courthouse buzzed with reporters, their cameras flashing as we walked up the marble steps. Gregory strutted beside his attorneys, his suit immaculate, his grin cocky as though the press itself were proof of his importance. He glanced at me as we passed, whispering just loud enough for the microphones to catch. "You're going to lose Vanessa. No one believes in you. They never have." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. The judge presided with stern authority, her gavel striking to silence the murmurs. Gregory's lawyers attacked first, their voices dripping with condescension as they painted me as a bitter daughter concocting fantasies from a derelict boat. They presented glossy photos of Miller properties of Gregory shaking hands with city officials of the empire in full swing. This one lawyer declared is the legacy of Richard Miller, not a moldy notebook and a woman desperate for attention. My cheeks burned, but Helen placed a reassuring hand on my arm before rising. Her voice cut through the room like tempered steel. "The question is not who looks the part of an heir. The question is what Richard Miller chose. And Richard Miller was a man who valued evidence." She presented the documents one by one, deeds signed in my father's hand, notarized transfers, bank records. The board members themselves testified that they had reviewed the papers and found them legitimate. Then came the video. The lights dimmed as it played on the screen. My father's face filled the room, his voice steady and unmistakable. "Vanessa will hold Miller Foundations. Gregory cannot be trusted with what I built from the ground." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Gregory's face went pale, then red, then twisted into rage. He leapt to his feet. He was manipulated. She tricked him. "Sit down, Mr. Miller," the judge commanded, her gavel cracking like thunder. The courtroom fell silent. The trial lasted days, but each new piece of evidence chipped away at Gregory's arrogance. Witnesses from the marina confirmed my father's routine visits. Financial experts verified the company's accounts. Even Gregory's own former assistant admitted under oath that he had been instructed to find ways to bury any records connecting me to the holdings. By the final day, Gregory looked nothing like the smug heir who had laughed at me over champagne. His suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, his confidence cracked. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. "The court finds the documentation valid and binding. Vanessa Miller is the rightful owner of Miller Foundations, LLC. Furthermore, evidence shows Mr. Gregory Miller attempted to falsify documents to undermine these holdings. Such actions will be referred for further legal review." The gavel fell, and the sound echoed through me like a drumbeat of justice. Gregory collapsed back into his chair, defeated, while cameras outside the courthouse caught every angle of his humiliation. Reporters shouted questions as I stepped into the sunlight, Helen beside me. For once, the whispers weren't about how forgotten I was. They were about how Richard Miller's overlooked daughter had just changed the balance of an empire. And yet, even in victory, I knew this wasn't the end. Justice had been served in court, but the cost to Gregory, to my mother, to the fragile remains of our family was only beginning to surface. The verdict reverberated through the city like a bell that could not be unrung. By the next morning, headlines splashed across newspapers and news sites carried words that my brother had always assumed would be reserved for his triumphs: Miller heir, loses court, battle to sister. Photos of Gregory storming out of the courthouse with cameras flashing caught every angle of his humiliation. The empire he had strutted into believing was his alone now stood split, and his share diminished not by my hands, but by the will of the man he had claimed to embody. For the first time, I saw fear in Gregory's eyes. At the office, whispers followed him down the hall. Board members who once circled him like loyal courtiers now avoided his gaze, their confidence shaken by his reckless attempt to discredit me. Investors pulled back wary of his arrogance and the legal stains now attached to his name. A week later, the financial press reported Miller Properties had lost nearly 20% of its value, citing instability at the helm. Gregory's phone calls, once answered eagerly, now went ignored. At home, the fallout cut even deeper. My mother, Margaret, sat at the edge of my apartment's sofa, her hands trembling as she spoke. I never thought your father... I never knew Gregory wasn't his blood. He never told me. Her voice cracked under the weight of betrayal. All these years, I let your brother be the center of everything because I thought Richard wanted it that way. I thought my silence was loyalty, but I see now it was cowardice. Her admission ached, but it also carved out something tender in the hollow space between us. For the first time, she wasn't silent. For the first time, she saw me. Gregory, however, refused to bend. He cornered me in the lobby of Miller Properties one morning, his face pale, his eyes bloodshot. "You think you've won?" he hissed, spittle flying. "You've destroyed everything. The board doesn't respect me anymore. Clients are pulling out. And you," his voice cracked into a bitter laugh, "you don't even want this empire. You're not built for it. You'll ruin it." I met his fury with calm. The difference between us, Gregory, is that I don't see an empire as a toy. I see it as a responsibility. That's why Dad trusted me. His jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists, but he had nothing left to throw at me except rage. His words, once amplified by a room full of laughter, now fell flat, hollow, powerless. He walked away with his shoulders hunched, a man stripped of the only thing he ever thought gave him value. Meanwhile, I made my first move. With Helen's guidance, I announced the creation of the Miller Foundation's trust dedicated to funding scholarships for young engineers and providing safer housing for construction workers, the kind of people my father once worked beside. The press ate it up. Headlines shifted from courtroom scandal to human interest. Forgotten daughter honors father's true legacy. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. While Gregory drowned in public scorn, I stood before cameras cutting the ribbon on a housing project funded by assets he had dismissed as worthless. The applause that day wasn't just for the bricks and mortar behind me. It was for the proof that the daughter once humiliated in a boardroom was now shaping something lasting. At the next shareholder meeting when I entered the room, the silence was different. Not the silence of mockery or pity, but the silence of acknowledgement. I had fought, I had endured, and I had brought proof that Richard Miller's faith in me wasn't misplaced. I was no longer the overlooked child. I was the one carrying his name forward. Gregory didn't show up. Some said he had fled the city licking his wounds. Others whispered about debts, bad deals, doors slamming in his face. For me, his absence wasn't triumph, it was consequence. He had mocked me in public, laughed at my humiliation, tried to strip me of dignity. Now the world had turned its back on him, and he was left to taste what it meant to be invisible. Justice wasn't always poetic, but this time it was clear, undeniable, and heavy with consequence. My brother had lost the empire he thought defined him, and I had gained not only the hidden legacy my father intended, but something Gregory would never understand, respect earned, not demanded. The weeks after the verdict felt like standing in the eye of a storm calm on the surface, but with wreckage swirling all around me. Gregory's downfall had become a spectacle for the city. Headlines tracked his every misstep, creditors knocking on his door, a failed investment scheme exposed, and whispers that his so-called allies had abandoned him. It should have felt like vindication, yet in the quiet moments I felt only exhaustion. Winning in court had given me justice, but justice could not stitch back a broken family. One evening, my mother came to see me again. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders hunched under the weight of secrets that had finally cracked open. She sat at my kitchen table, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "Your father kept so much from me," she said softly. "About Gregory's bloodline, about the company, about you. I thought I was protecting him by staying silent all these years, but really I was protecting myself from facing the truth." Her eyes shimmered as she looked at me, and for once there was no avoidance, no deflection. "Vanessa, I was wrong. I should have defended you. I should have seen you. Can you ever forgive me?" The child inside me longed to scream, "No," to list every birthday forgotten, every insult unchallenged, every moment she had chosen Gregory's comfort over my dignity. But the woman I had become, the one who had stood in a courtroom and won, saw the truth in her tears. She had lived in Gregory's shadow almost as much as I had bound by my father's silence and her own fear. "I don't know if I can forget," I said slowly, "but I can forgive. Because Dad left me something bigger than money. He left me the chance to build differently. And maybe that starts here." Her breath shook as relief washed over her. For the first time, I felt a fragile bridge forming between us, not built on denial or pretense, but on honesty. Gregory, however, was another matter. A month after the trial, he appeared at the marina. I found him leaning against the marigold, his once pristine suit wrinkled, his face drawn. He didn't sneer this time. His voice was low, almost broken. "You ruined me." I stood on the deck staring down at him. "No, Gregory, you ruined yourself. I just stopped you from ruining me too." He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "You think you've won because Dad handed you some hidden treasure, because the court stamped your name on paper. You'll never be what he wanted. You don't have the stomach for it." I gripped the railing, my voice steady. Maybe I don't have the stomach to devour everything in sight. Maybe I don't want to. Dad didn't choose me because I was ruthless. He chose me because I build. And you can't understand that because you've only ever destroyed. For a moment, he looked like he might lash out, but instead, he sagged against the dock post, defeated. "I don't know who I am without this," he muttered more to himself than to me. His words cut, not because they hurt me, but because for the first time I saw the hollow boy beneath the arrogance, a boy who had been fed privilege in place of love, entitlement in place of effort. "I hope you figure it out," I said quietly. "But I can't carry you anymore." He didn't answer. He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy, fading into the mist. That night, my mother and I sat together on the marigold, the restored deck beneath our feet. The boat creaked softly, but it no longer felt like rot. It felt like memory, like legacy. "He wanted us here," my mother whispered. "Maybe not in this way, but together." I looked out at the horizon, the last of the sun melting into the sea. For the first time in years, I felt the sharp edge of resentment dull, replaced by something steadier. I hadn't just uncovered my father's secret. I had uncovered myself. Family wasn't about who laughed loudest at your pain. It wasn't about who sat at the head of the table or who had the flashiest titles. Family, I realized, was about who stayed, who tried, who dared to rebuild. And I was ready to rebuild. The marigold's wood gleamed under the golden glow of sunset, her decks freshly polished, her rails restored. I had poured weeks of sweat into bringing her back to life, stripping away rot, sanding down years of neglect, laying fresh coats of paint. Each plank I touched felt like stitching a wound, sealing not only the scars of the boat, but also the fractures in my own heart. Standing on her deck now, she no longer looked like a symbol of humiliation. She looked like a vessel reborn, carrying the weight of everything my father had tried to tell me. The day of her relaunch drew a small crowd. Neighbors, dock workers, former colleagues of my father all gathered to see the boat that had become a headline, a legend in its own right. My mother stood at my side, her hand lightly gripping mine, her silence no longer a shield but a support. Helen was there too, her sharp eyes softening when she saw me beam with pride. I gave a short speech, my voice carrying across the water. This boat was dismissed as worthless, much like I was dismissed for most of my life. But inside its hull, my father left the Truth Records memories and a legacy that was meant to endure. He knew the empire of glass and steel could crack, but the foundations, the ones you cannot see, are what hold everything together. That was his lesson, and it's mine now to carry forward. Applause rippled across the pier. Not the polite claps of a boardroom, but the genuine cheers of people who understood what it meant to fight to be seen. Later, as the crowd dispersed, I remained on the deck, the horizon stretching endlessly before me. My thoughts wandered to Gregory. Word around the city was that he had left perhaps to Europe chasing some new scheme. His name had become synonymous with arrogance and downfall, and though part of me still ached for the brother I once wished I could have, I knew his journey was no longer tied to mine. He had chosen his path, and I had chosen mine. The following week, I signed the paperwork officially launching the Miller Foundation's trust. The first project broke ground in a working-class neighborhood my father once helped build in his early days. Scholarships for young engineers followed, each one named after my father's workers, the men and women who had labored beside him long before the millions came. For every ribbon I cut, I felt him beside me, not as the distant patriarch who overlooked me, but as the man who in his final act entrusted me with something real. On a quiet evening not long after my mother and I returned to the Marigold, she carried a framed photo of my father younger in a construction helmet, his eyes filled with determination. She set it on the cabin shelf, her fingers lingering on the glass. "He would be proud of you," she whispered. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. For the first time, I believed that. As the sun dipped low, casting fire across the waves, I whispered the name I had painted on the Marigold's stern legacy. Because that's what this journey had been about all along. Not money, not power, not skyscrapers that reached the sky, but cracked under arrogance. Legacy was quieter, sturdier. It lived in the hidden foundations, in the choices we made when no one else was watching. I breathed in the salt air, the sound of gulls fading into the distance, and felt a peace I had never known in my father's boardrooms or at my brother's side. My story was no longer defined by what I didn't get. It was defined by what I had found. I turned to my mother and Helen, my voice steady, filled with the clarity of someone who had finally stopped searching for approval and started living in truth. This is what family means, not inheritance, not favoritism, but building something that lasts. And I intend to keep building. The water lapped gently against the hull, the sound like applause from the sea itself. For the first time, I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the overlooked engineer, the sister mocked in front of a crowd. I was Vanessa Miller, and this was my legacy.